and that is me again, of course. I hope my screen is visible to everybody. As I said, my name is Patrick Reumelman. I work at BTG, which is an SME that works for biomass, for energy and materials. The workshop is held in the framework of the Aligned project. The Aligned project is an EU Horizon 2020 project, and it is funded by the European Union. And the rationale for that is that industrial bio-based processes, it's written very nicely in the call text, they hold the promise of many good things: reversing climate change, restoring biodiversity, protecting air, water, soil quality in the EU and even across borders. But to make sure that that's happened, the environmental performance of industrial bio-based sectors need to be improved. In this call, we focus on 5 sectors: construction, woodworking, textiles, pulp and paper, and biochemicals. In all these sectors, bio-based feedstocks are used, and in all these sectors, the environmental performance can and should be improved. The Align project was one of the 2 projects which was selected for funding. Then the second part of the rationale is why we did it. And that is a story which is about a previous project which we did for the European Union. It was called the EU Biorefinery Outlook. And there we talked to stakeholders in bio-based industries about what's holding them back for gaining more market share and more production. And it was clear that evidence on sustainability was seen as a key barrier. Proving sustainability is costly. You need a full LCA on a product level. LCAs are open to interpretation. There is no level playing field with fossil competition. Labels are not always effective. Methods are sector specific and the terminology is confusing. So what we want to do, we want to improve the environmental sustainability directly and by improving the methodologies. And that's, of course, the topic of the workshop, the methodologies that we want to align and improve. Our overall goal is to provide an evidence-based methodology to improve the decision-making for sustainability, performance, and a lot of nice words. Specific objectives are to improve, harmonize, and align LCA methodology. We want to demonstrate it in 5 case studies in these 5 sectors. And of course, we want to inform, involve, and empower relevant stakeholders. This is, of course, what we do now. More graphically, this is what we want to try to achieve. We want to improve the environmental performance of the 5 case studies. We want to align the LCA methods and simplify the LCA methods. And that should make sure that LCA development is strengthened and widened. We want to reduce the costs. We want to try that. And we want to inform policymakers, avoid mistakes, etc. And that all should, of course, increase the growth of circular bio-based systems. We do that by starting with the state of the art, harmonize the methodology, work with case studies in an iterative analysis, and have communication and feedback with the stakeholders. We do that with around 10 companies and universities. Those are companies from the sectors. Some research SMEs, BTG is one of them, and the universities, 2 of them. One of them is INSA, where Lorie Hamelin is working, and one of them is Aalborg University, which is the home of Massimo Pizzol. Then we go a little bit more to our workshop. And the idea of this is that we, as a project, we are committed to an open science approach. This means that our outputs are managed as open and fair as possible. And FAIR is an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So we commit to open data, the open methodology, and the open access. And specifically the second point, this open methodology, it means that we want to have stakeholder engagement with you all during the methodology development. And this is why we hold this workshop now. We want to have 3 methodology workshops, one of them now, one of them in 6 months, and one of them in 12 months. And we want to gather feedback during the beginning, when we are devising our approach, when we make progress, and when we have our results to gather feedback. So we have 2 topics today. One is about the modeling of the life cycle inventory done by Massimo. I had 2 questions. How do we account for constraints in the availability of biomass? The second one is, how do we account for dynamic uptake and emissions? And the second part in the second hour is about the characterization of climate impacts. How do we characterize the impacts of carbon uptake, and how do we characterize the impact of dynamic carbon emissions? This is, of course, not all what we do, but we have time constraints and we want to have a balance between depth and coverage. We have a stakeholder network as a project. This means you can join with this QR code. This means that when you are part of the network, we will regularly inform you of what we do. We won't spam you with too many emails, but we try to limit that to the things which are really interesting. Join us if you think it is interesting. That's it. You can get connected in all kinds of ways, of course. Visit our website, you will find out. Thank you, and I would like to give the word to Massimo.
Hi, thank you, Patrick, and I hope you can hear me. I'm going to share my presentation in a second. Here we go. So I hope you can all see the presentation in presenter mode. If not, please let me know. So I'm going to introduce you introduce the first part of the workshop, which is as Patrick has just presented, is about the inventory part, and it's about how can the modeling of the life cycle inventory of bio-based products be improved, and this is part of a work package 1 in our project. And I'm Massimo Pizzol from Aalborg University in Denmark. So the first part of the presentation is about the competition for biomass. So we know that the bioeconomy is growing, and research shows that there are different ways to get feedstock for making bio-based products. In particular, when we look at, for example, forest, there are 3 ways. Either we increase the forest harvest from current forest, or we redirect existing wood uses, or we establish new plantations. And this is a projection about how much, for example, global plantation will be needed up to 2100 to 2000 to fill, let's say, the demand for wood in the construction sector. We also know from research that since that it's important to consider the constraints to the availability of this biomass when we do the assessment of bio-based products. Another way to look at this problem is to look at it from a competition perspective. So we can see that the bioeconomy means basically an increasing demand for feedstock. And we can safely assume that several industries and sectors are already and will compete for the same biomass. There is also a lot of interest in waste or residual feedstocks, that are currently unused, but we can also safely assume that in the future this will be increasingly unavailable, or let's say increasingly fully used. So will this mean some cascading effects to new production? If this is the case, and if we need to produce new feedstocks from new plantations, then the supply will depend on the geography as well as the production capacity of the different suppliers. So the questions that we are interested in the project is, what are the constraints to the supply of biomass for a bioeconomy? How can we make an LCA model that takes into account these constraints? And will this LCA model improve the assessment of bio-based products? Now let's look at the theoretical basis. How can you identify the constraints to the supply of biomass? And the approach that we use in this project is really pretty much based on a principle of consequential life cycle assessment. We have sketched a sort of overall algorithm to analyze the problem. I'll go through that quickly in a second. And in particular, the focus is not very complex, but the focus that we put is on how to help the users to motivate the choices in this algorithm and which data to be used to test each assumption. We provide also a step-by-step guide. Our purpose is to make a tiered approach so that users with difficult levels of expertise can still use our tools. So we provide different levels of complexity, let's say. And then we provide examples for specific situations so that you can see the use of this algorithm in practice. And I'll present a couple of them in the following. So let's look very quickly at this. We don't have a lot of time, but the idea is that we start with the need to identify a supplier for a certain type of biomass. And the first question to ask is whether this is a determining product or not for the activity. And then we provide some suggestions on how can you figure out if this is a determining product or not. And then if it is not, then it could be a constrained product. And then the way to go is whether understanding if there is a market for this product or not. And if not, it could be modeled as avoided waste treatment. And if yes, it could be modeled using a marginal mix. If we go the other way around, then if we assume this is a determining product, but we are looking whether production can be increased. And if not, then we also have a constraint, and then we need to use a marginal mix. And if yes, then this supplier can be included into the marginal mix. And so, as I was saying before, the focus is not much on making a new algorithm because this is pretty much existing consequential LCA theory. So there's nothing really new here. What we stress is like we provide suggestions on how to motivate these choices and which data can you use for doing that. So our work is really much user-centered. How can you use these tools in the best way? Let's look at an example. If we want to model, for example, the supply of timber for construction, that's a typical example of a bio-based product for the construction sector, timber. So is timber a determining product? Well, most of the time it is. In most plantations in Europe are actually designed to produce timber. That's their main product, main revenue. The question is then, yes, can we expand production? And then not all suppliers can expand production. So how will you figure out if this is the case when you can use data about timber production trends in EU or globally? And then those that can expand production, you can be included into a marginal mix. And we also provide guidance on how to create this marginal mix. And I have some slides about that later. So as you see, this is very simple sort of algorithm or flow decision tree, and we're focusing on how to provide providing guidance to make sound assumptions, because there are some assumptions to be made. Let's look at another example, chips from residues. So chips can be a co-product, for example, of other plantations for timber or from sawmilling activities. So the first question is this a determining product? If not, because as co-product of plantation or sawmilling, then this is assumed as constrained. Is there a market? Yes, chips can be used for energy and fuel. So an increase in demand for chips will result in new plantation of, for example, short rotation crops. So this is again an example of how you can use the algorithm to determine to basically make your model and your LCA model and which data and information to use to back up the assumptions that you use in each step, in each decision, let's say. Another thing that we looked in the project is to look into which data can be used to, for example, make a marginal mix that I was mentioning before. Concretely, what is needed is data on production of, for example, wood products over time or forecasts about the amounts produced. And we did a review of most recent data sets and data sources and also literature, and we narrowed down to 3 of them. We have a focus on Europe, so the FAUSTAT, the JRC, and the S2 Biome data sources, and we compare them. However, the comparison was not, there is some discordance between the sources. So we see some deviations. So in the end, we decided to, we wanted also to find, we were hoping to find more scenario data because that would be ideal because we can avoid the assumption that the future will look like the past. So that this is what the assumption you implicitly make when you use historical time series, but these were not available to a sufficient level of granularity to make the analysis we wanted. So we continue with FAUSTAT as main choice. This is a reliable source, sustainable on the long term because it's always updated and there's coverage for many products. So the tool that we have developed feeds in on this FAUSTAT data, which are very extensive. So how do you define a marginal mix that takes into account the different suppliers and in somehow addresses the problem of, directly addresses the problem of constraints and indirectly that of competition? Well, this is also an established method for making marginal mixes in consequential LCA. It has been used, it is described here in this website for in a very user-friendly way, and is been used in many other research papers. Implements a linear regression based on historical data, and based on the trends that you can find for each supplier, you select the suppliers that have, for example, if you have a mix, let's say, of geographical market with 3 suppliers in the Nordics, for example, then you can identify those with a positive trend and then calculate a share in the mix which is proportional to this trend. This is really a basic method, very simple to apply, and that we provide tools to do that based on the FAUSTAT data. An interesting thing is that since it's relatively simple and based on basic statistics, you can easily calculate uncertainties on each estimate as well. So wrapping up, what is the current status for the aligned approach regarding the identification of constraints to biomass? We have a description of the theoretical basis of a method and recommendations for application. We have algorithms to implement the analysis, flowchart and data guidance and illustrative cases. We have made a comparative analysis of different data sources to be used for making a marginal mix. And then we have guidelines, spreadsheets, and code, if you are into code, to calculate a marginal mix directly starting from FAUSTAT data at different levels of complexity. Now, it's time for the kind of interactive part. This is a sort of, I should make a little parenthesis here. When we first designed this workshop, we were expecting something like 20 or 30 participants, but we have more than 200 people signed up. So we couldn't have like a discussion with people intervening. So we decided to make a sort of a series of polls or little surveys. And the next survey will be about, you have to make a choice. It's a multiple choice questions. You have to choose to evaluate whether, based on the presentation I just gave, to evaluate whether we should improve the relevance of the approach, the scientific soundness, or the applicability. A relevant approach is an approach that addresses the problem closely. A scientific sound approach uses evidence and models reality as close as possible, or for example, by reproducing cause effects, builds on scientific evidence and peer-reviewed sources, and is reproducible and transparent. And applicability is about whether the approach is sufficiently easy to understand and use, whether it's reproducible, and whether it can be implemented with reasonable resources. Now, of course, you just got a very quick presentation of the proposed approach, but we still need to get the feedback from you. What is your immediate impression about that? So I can't see the chat right now, but I assume there must be a survey up.
It should be on the screen of everyone.
Yes, so this is a multiple choice question. What do you think we should focus on in the next steps of a project regarding this specific part of the analysis? Yeah, okay. We have 123 people in the list, so and 70 votes. So please vote as quick as you can, so we can move on to the next question. I'll just do something like this because I can't have my full presentation and the poll together somehow. So can you see the presentation still in this format?
Yes.
Yeah, good. All right. 92. Okay. Please vote again. Let's give it 30 seconds more and then we close the survey. And even meanwhile, if you have any other comment, you are very welcome to write in the chat. Charlotte writes, it's difficult. I don't feel like having a lot of insights. I totally understand, Charlotte, and of course, it was a very flash presentation, and you don't have all the bases. So, I mean, we are asking for maybe what is your gut feeling after this hearing this presentation? Any feedback is appreciated, and it's also okay if you don't feel to provide any feedback. All right, I think we will now close the first part of the survey. So the result is that applicability is the main aspect we should improve right now. This doesn't mean that we won't be working on the other parts, of course. It's just in order to get a feedback of what is the major hotspot, let's say. Okay, so there will be a follow-up question now regarding applicability. So this is a Likert scale question. So to what extent do you find the approach applicable? And after that, there will be also another question about applicability. This is just to understand how good or bad we are doing in terms of making it applicable based on the presentation I gave. So maybe I can show you some other slide in the meanwhile. So that has to do with applicability. So for example, applicable things that we have made are the, I mean, there is a flow chart with a method including recommendations for application, so a sort of guideline. There are example cases. There is also for applying the algorithm. There is a guideline for calculating a marginal mix. There is a spreadsheet to do that. We just type in the data that you need, and then it will calculate, and there is code to do that as well in Python, for example. How well are we doing with the survey here? How many people did vote? 62. 5 is max. Sorry, I should have said that. 1 means, oh, it doesn't show, right? Very sorry. 1 means not very applicable, and 5 means very applicable. So 5 is good, and 1 is not good. Okay, 68. I'll give it other 20 seconds to decide, and then we move on to the next question because we have a very packed schedule. And thank you for your feedback, of course, which we are very interested in, and it's very important. Okay, 73. Okay, 5 seconds, and then we close, Marisa. Perfect. Let's see. The moment of truth. Well, it's a bit, how do you say? We were really in doubt which question to ask here. Like this is like, it feels like an exam, but I think it's quite important to get feedback from the community. So we have something to work on. Okay, 3.3 is the answer, which is right a bit above average. We could have done better, so we'll focus on making more applicable. But there is also another follow-up question where you can give us some suggestions on what you would be your preference. Now you should be able to see a new poll in the chart. Sorry. So here you have to rank these options. Okay, so you find 4 options. How can we improve applicability? And you have to rank them by importance, where 1 is the most important. Right, Marisa? Yes.
Yes.
So top is most important and bottom is least important. When you're done doing this ranking, then if you see in the bottom right of the poll, there is a 1/2. You can move on to the next panel, and there you can enter a comment. So, and the comment we ask you to please give is whether there is another aspect that we can improve that is not mentioned in the previous 4 multiple choices. So we have tried to identify some areas that could be areas for improvement. And then, but if we have left something out, or if you think about something more relevant, then you're welcome to add it in the next panel or next little survey window.
Just a quick note, all of the questions are anonymous, so
oh
you
yes,
can leave
thanks.
the comments that you
Thanks.
want. Yeah.
Thanks. I should also say, this is a little spoiler, that in the next part of the workshop, you will get the same questions, okay, but about different presentations. So it's the same concept. So now we are trying it, and then, but then when you listen to the next presentation, you can keep in mind, you will be asked to evaluate relevance, scientific soundness, and applicability, and then depending on what is chosen, to provide some suggestions and the rating. Okay, and you're always welcome to write in the chat if you have additional comments that are not asked in the questions. So we have 65 answers, 66. I'll give it other 20 seconds. We have a lot of idle people in the meeting, 120 and only 70 answering. The others are maybe having difficulties answering these questions or just want to listen. Doesn't matter. It's okay. But we evaluate your feedback anyway. But but I think we have a how do you call it, representative sample of the population with more than 50% voting. Okay, 5 seconds left to rank. And then, yeah, and again, please leave comments in the second part if the options listed there were not, if you have something else to add. Okay, 82, 83, Marisa, I think we can close now. Thank you all for your feedbacks. All right, good. Then let's move on to the second part of the presentation. I assume that you can still see my screen, and I will move to presenter mode again. So again, just a little spoiler, you will get this question later again, okay, and I will show you this slide again. But now when you listen to the second part of the presentation, keep in mind that this question will pop up at the end of it. All right. Sorry, my screen is doing a bit of funky things. So the second part of my presentation is about the dynamic carbon accounting. Now, so we know that bio-based products, they are many, and they have different lifetimes and end of lives. We also know that carbon uptake and release, when it comes to bio-based products, happens at different points in time. Because, for example, when you produce a piece of timber for a construction, for a building, you will grow a forest at some time, you will process the roundwood, make the building, integrate the piece of wood in the building, have it staying there for 100 years, or maybe less, 70 years, and then maybe burn it afterwards. So this happens, the carbon uptake and release happens at different points in time. And the impact of this carbon uptake and release depends on such timing. Okay. Also, another example is, I mean, I made an example with a product with a very long life, but we have also products with extremely short lives, like a bio plastic used for packaging. Anyway, we know also from previous studies that a dynamic LCA approach that is the best approach to allow for a consistent assessment of the impact through time of the greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration processes. We also know that feedstock, like wood or other type of feedstocks, come from different type of plantations with different rotation times. And we also know that current plantation life cycle inventories are neither dynamic, or most of them are not, and they are also not diverse. We have very few data sets about this. So we can't really cover the diversity of type of feedstock that are produced out there. So the questions that we have in the project are, what are the dynamics of carbon uptake and emissions in bio-based products? How can we make an LCA inventory that considers these dynamics accurately? And will this LCA model improve the assessment of bio-based products? Now, the approach that we are using in the project is to take starting point in a carbon flux model. This has been published in 17 and also in 19 with this method description and application of a method. This is a model that calculates time-dependent material and carbon flows for forest plantation, includes above and below ground carbon pools, and can be parameterized to a good extent, but was originally limited to only 2 species. What we did during the project was to improve the model interface, which is now Excel-based, and we did more testing on the new interface, fixing bugs and extending the databases. I'll come back to that in a second. And we are now currently testing the model on a variety of use species for different wood plantations. Forest plantations. And then we are optimizing it for importing the results directly into LCA software. And the objective is to model any type of wood product from virgin unconstrained plantation, as I mentioned before. What is the intended application area? So this can be used in any LCA of sort of wood-based products, for example, in woodworking sector, in construction, but also in pulp and paper and biochemicals, where a lot of cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin, they are all products from, in fact, lignocellulosic feedstock that you can model with this tool. Now, just a quick overview of a model. You have also the references at the end of this presentation. It calculates the input and output from forest biomass in 4 different pools: the uptake in stems, in harvested woody debris, in above ground non-harvested debris, and below ground non-harvested debris. And here on the right, you can see like example of how it looks like. So you basically have the for example, this is for 1 hectare, the amount of CO2 which is uptaken in the 4 different pools over a certain rotation time of a bit more than 70 years in this case. In practice, how does it look like? As I said, it is an Excel tool, in fact. This is like one of the starting pages where you can define all your parameters, and the parameters are important parameters are, for example, the rotation time for a plantation, whether it's a long or a short one, the annual increment in above ground biomass, the density of wood, the carbon content, the ratio between below ground and above ground, and so on and so on and so on. There are a lot of parameters that can be defined. And then a little bit on the output of a model. There is a mass balance for the growing biomass, so how much input and how much output. So this is a mass balance model. So we ensure the mass balance all the time. And then, of course, you can convert this into CO2 fluxes in input and output in the 4 different pools. Now, I'm not going through that now, but this model then, connects to life cycle impact assessment module, where you can calculate the time-dependent characterization factors for global warming potential, like global temperature potential, and this is in the next presentation. So you can use this model in combination with dynamic characterization factors. As I said, it is important to be able to model a range of different potential feedstocks. And that's why we are compiling also a database, which, as you see here, is just a table, in fact, with the data to be used to model different type of plantations, in fact, that you can use directly in the model, so that you don't have to find them yourself. You just have to like look in this list and find the type of tree plantation you want to model, and then there will be a suggestion for the parameters to use in the model based on. Right now we are using only exclusively open access data, but we are extending this database to as many species as we can, and there we might have some data that are from sources that are reported here and referenced. Yeah. So what is the current status regarding the time and space dependent carbon accounting in the Aligned project? We have a model interface, Excel based, to simulate wood plantation and return a dynamic carbon flow inventory. Dynamic means which is year by year. A database with the species-specific data to use in the model, all from open sources at the moment. And then we have importers for getting the resulting inventory that you can get from the model into LCA software, and tutorials for the use of a model. So what is an example of use? You want to model a plantation of Norway spruce, Picea abies, with a 70-year rotation time, 3 thinnings at year 5, 15, and 25, use of co-products for making chips, incineration at the end of life of the sawn wood after 100 years. You can do that using this model. And what you get is an inventory with a time-specific or aggregated CO2 uptake, if you want to aggregate it afterwards. And then you can get a CSV file for importing CIMA Pro that links to EcoInvent version 3.9 for background data. So that's like a really clear example of use for the mod. And that's it for the short presentation about the time and space dependent carbon accounting. Now here the slide that I promised you would appear. So now again, you know the drill a bit. You will be asked to please, there will be a multiple choice question appearing in the chat, and you have to tell us if you think we should improve the relevance of the approach, scientific soundness, or the applicability. And again, a relevant approach is addressing closely the problem under analysis. So time and space, it does actually time and space dependent carbon accounting. A scientific sound approach is evidence-based, tries to model reality as close as possible. For example, by reproducing cause effects, based on scientific evidence, peer-reviewed sources is reproducible and transparent. And applicability is about whether you feel, I mean, you don't know yet, but based on my presentation, if you imagine that this looks sufficiently easy to understand and use, or is sufficiently reproducible, and whether you think this could be implemented with reasonable resources. And here, I'll just leave this here and do like this. Sorry, I need to improve a bit my Teams skills here. I'm just sharing again so you can see the last slide, but without presenter mode, otherwise I don't see anything. So I guess the survey is up, right? Yes. So please go ahead and vote. How many votes? 60. We can do better than that. 30 more seconds. There are some questions in the chat, and Lorie is taking care of those. A lot of questions. $75 votes. Should we give it other 20 seconds more? Okay, in the meanwhile, while these 20 seconds pass, there is a question about accounting for temporary carbon storage, delayed emission in bio-based products. I would say that yeah, you can use the model to do that, because you can use the part where you have you can make your dynamic inventory and say, okay, I will have emission at this time, and then link with a characterization factor at that time. So yes, the answer would be it is possible, but I must be honest that we haven't designed it exactly for this. So maybe, so you need to know how the model works, and then you can use it to do that. But maybe we can improve the interface so that one can do it directly more easily. SIMA Pro connection is good. How about OpenLCA or Brightway? We have Brightway connection for the moment. SIMA Pro and EcoInvent are proprietary. Yeah, we don't provide EcoInvent datasets. These we are not allowed to share them, but we provide you the way to link to them so that you can create your inventory that will link to specific datasets that you have in your database, and then import that into software. Does it integrate with Biotree Temporalis? Not at the moment. Okay. I have to stop because the time is off. What is the result for the survey? We take into account all your questions, just the time is short, and we'll try to write answers, and if we can't, we just take them back. And sorry if we can't answer all your questions. We have to kind of follow the schedule. Marisa, how is the result? We have 82 votes. That's about the people who vote here. We are again on improving applicability. So thank you very much for that, and there will be a series of follow-up questions that will be just as before. So the next question is about, again, rating the level of applicability that you can see at the moment. Of course, you haven't tried it, but what is your impression after this presentation? So again, one, oh, now there is the scale, fantastic. So 1 means not applicable, and 5, or let's say not very applicable, and 5 is very applicable. And while you vote, I'll try to go through some of the questions here in the chat. And Lorie is also answering a lot of them, so imported for open LCA, okay, point taken. We might have to talk with people from open LCA. The Excel tool will be available as part of a project once we are in about 6 months, actually. There will be a first version out. The recording for today, I'm not sure, maybe Marisa or Patrick will be able to answer here. Does the model contain the economic part, let's say the price of biomass or future price? No, that's more about, that's a model about mass balances. Okay, how many votes did we get here? 65. 10 more seconds, please rate the applicability, and then we move on to the next question. And thank you all for your questions. It's very interesting to see what are your thoughts and concerns. That gives us some inspiration for the next phases of the project. So it's very important. Okay, we can close this poll here and move on to the next question. Let's see. Let's hope it's 3.5 now. No, we didn't see the results. Oh, I went too fast. Can we go back and see them?
Yes. Yeah. Do you see them?
Let's see. It's loading. Yeah, I think it will be pop up.
It's a 3.6, the average.
Oh, 3.6. No, I can't see the results, but never mind.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you all. And then the next question, you should be able to see it in the chat. So this is again a ranking question. To please rank is not the same options as before, so it's different different options. It's about ranking what can we do to improve applicability. And just as before, there is a second in the bottom of right of the little survey window. There is a 1/2. Means if you click there, you can go on the second side and you can provide your own input, let's say, to what we can improve what we can do to improve applicability. Is it closed? I get a comment here. No, people are voting, so I think it's working.
It should be okay now.
Yeah. Okay, so again, a list of options that you can please rank. And of course, we will take it into account because we also need to, I mean, we have limited time and resources. We need to know on what to focus next. And this is really important feedback for us to prioritize our next steps, and those to avoid to make things that the community doesn't find super relevant. Because if you are here, you are the community. All right, we have 38 votes. I don't believe we have survey fatigue yet, and there will be even 2 more of those. So I'll try to keep up the good spirit and the good mood. But there will also be a short break after this, so that you can breathe a second. And in the meanwhile, we change presenter and presentations, and then we are ready to go with the next topic. 51 voters. Let's say we have 20-30 more seconds. In the meanwhile, you are always welcome to add your comments in the chat if you want, and your questions. And I don't know, do we have a way, if you really have a question that it's a burning question and it was not answered during this session, you're very welcome to write me or Lorie. There will be our emails. They are in the presentations, and they are also, I think, well, you can find them. We will write them also in the chat. You're very welcome to write a mail and with your question, and then we will do our best to answer. Okay, thank you. Last 5 seconds for voting, ranking the options, and then can you present the slides with the references? Sure, I can. Okay, we are, come on, 58.2, so we get 60, round number, and then we close this survey. We have 60 people. This project has about 60 people, so the rest are not voting because they are already in the project. Okay, 59. One more. 60. Okay, we can close. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. Now I leave my slide on, and then we give you how much is that? We are supposed to start at 11. I'll give you 5 minutes break. I would say if you just stay here in the meeting, just mute your camera, mute your microphone, and then get your coffee or whatever. But so that we avoid this people entering and exiting all the time, which is a bit annoying for the people here in the background admitting participants. So just a 5-minute short break, and then we'll continue with another presentation about 2 presentations and 2 more surveys. And thanks for your input so far. So we start again at 3 minutes past 11. And in the meanwhile, I will be staying here. If you have questions in the chat, you're welcome to write them, and I'll be answering. And I have also coffee ready, but cold. Okay. Marisa, all good from our side, technical wise?
Yes, it's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Lorie, is your presentation ready?
Yes, perhaps I can put it on.
Yeah,
and
just
try
put
to
it
share
on.
my screen.
I think those who are interested in this, they might have taken a screenshot already. So I'll just stop sharing.
Do you see in presenter mode?
I see presenter mode.
Good.
It's
No,
no, it's we can
It's
see
not.
the comments. Yeah.
We can see the comments.
Okay. And now, is that better?
Yes.
Good. And I don't see anything. That's normal. No, not
No,
myself.
you're supposed to. Do you see the presentation at least?
I do. That's all I see.
That's the same for me before. That's why I had to kind of juggle a bit between the teams and the presentation.
Yeah, Zoom
Okay.
is more handy.
I'm going to mute myself and answer the chat questions when you start in 2 minutes. Okay. And no more questions in the chat at the moment. Okay, 1 minute left. All right, it is 11:03, and as already said, we are going to start on time. So please, if you are not muted, please do it. And Lorie, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Massimo. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Lorie Hamelin. I'm chair professor from INRAE, and I'm based at INSA Toulouse, which is part of the Federal University of Toulouse. Before I start, a little disclaimer. So it's important to say that in Align, we don't develop, at least in this part, we don't develop new methodologies. So according to our deliverable, what we have to do is to propose a critical selection of best available method. And the vision is to improve the usability and availability of what already exists to address time and space dependency for life cycle impact assessment. And this was for two key impact, one being climate, of course, and another being biodiversity. And the status of this specific work is still at early stage. So the aim today is really to gather feedback on what we envision so we can make it relevant for the community. So we start by the first part of the presentation, and it's on an issue that we talk a lot about, and we can see it a lot on the LCA discussion list, for example, biogenic carbon. And before I start, I should say that there is, for instance, the Global Guidance for Life Cycle Impact Assessment Indicators and Method, the GLAM, is going to issue a guideline on biogenic carbon. I should also say what that is. What is biogenic carbon? So typically in LCA, there's often two categories of emission that are being distinguished. Those that are said to be fossil, so they come from the combustion of hydrocarbon from fossil origin, and those that are said to be biogenic, so they come from biomass and its transformation. And there are different approaches to account for this biogenic carbon. One being the so-called 0-0 approach. In this approach, it is considered that the biogenic CO2 is part of a short cycle where the exchanges between the different reservoirs happens over short periods and are stables, and then it's put in opposite with the fossil case, where the fossil CO2 emission are associated to long cycle that needs millions of years to reach an equilibrium. So based on this rationale, the idea here is that all the CO2 that is absorbed by the biomass is assigned a global warming or a characterization factor, let's say, of 0, because we say, well, this is just counterbalanced by the release, or the release is counterbalancing the absorption. So we consider it to be the same. Sometimes there could be a sequestration. So say you have here the case of a grass that you convert to a certain bio-based product and you use it. There are some co-product and some losses that's associated with carbon releases. And you have a biochar that is returned to soil for some reason in the process. And then this one here would then be associated to a flux of -1. I wrote +1 here. It's obviously -1. But the characterization factor of +1, yeah, and a flux of -1, yeah, that's correct. So the issues with this approach is that it induces the idea that there are no climate effects from the use of biomass. But that's not true. We know that burning wood emits just as much CO2 as burning coal. There are important CO2 flows that are invisible in the results and thus also in the decision-making process. The mass balance is distorted when the carbon, because sometimes the carbon is not emitted back as CO2, but as methane or as CO. These are accounted for, but nevertheless, you don't have a correct mass balance then, because you have taken all this carbon absorbed also as emitted back as CO2. So you have more carbon being emitted in some way than being absorbed. The temporary storage, we saw it in the questions, when biomass is harvested but not emitted immediately, cannot be reflected with this method. And if you have a process that induces that some biomass somewhere is not permitted to grow back, so there's a permanent addition of biogenic CO2 to the atmosphere, that's the so-called land use change. And then with this method, this cannot be reflected. This 0-0 approach is used, among other, in the PEF or the PFCR, the criteria rule guidance. But most industrial guidelines, for example, you have one for the chemistry sector, the TFS, seem to not recommend this approach, among other. So we look at what alternative exists, and the alternative, let's say it's the other extreme, the -1 +1 approach. So the uptake from the atmosphere is accounted with the characterization factor of -1, and the releases to atmosphere with the characterization factor of +1. So only net flows are accounted. Some issues that are reported with this is that, okay, the calculation can potentially be more difficult. There could be some misinterpretation of the result, especially if you have a cradle to gate system, and then you end up with a carbon negative product. And there could be a lot of issues related to, okay, but how to calculate this carbon absorbed by the biomass in the first place. So in many industrial guidelines, you will see the recommendation to take it equal to the carbon in the product, in the bio-based product that you're producing. That's not, or that induce a little error, because you might have some losses, and you do have some losses in the process, and these are then not accounted for. And in all cases, saying that this is difficult to calculate is not a reason not to try. So there are many ways that we can do that, and we started to develop a guideline with a tier approach. I will come back to that, either based on crop yields and some value that we can take from the literature, ratio crop to product residues, etc. Either based on a more specially explicit approach based on the NPP, net primary production, for example, and global land cover. But to adopt that, guidelines and suggestion of generic value are of course necessary, so we make sure it's operational. So to summarize, so this is the background, and now what do we envision as our recommendation in the line to deal with biogenic CO2? First, well, to account for all carbon flow, so that was in the inventory part of Massimo, either absorbed or emitted, and as they are, so as CO2, as CO, as methane. But we are aware we need to produce guidance to calculate the absorbed emission. So as I was saying, with equation and proposal of value for parameter in these, and also ranges to address uncertainty later. So we envision a tier approach, just like in the IPCC. So tier 1, let's say, easy to use, but less robust, up to tier 3, more complicated to use, but more robust. We see, our take is to favor the -1+1 approach. We want to propose, however, conservative choices on release for cradle to gate study, because these also do exist, to avoid having carbon negative product and misinterpretation. So we don't want to have a -1, 0 approach. We can wonder, do we want to have absolutely an indicator for biogenic CO2, fossil CO2, or greenhouse gases, or both? We think that we should at least have one that integrates both, because yeah, as I said again earlier, the atmosphere doesn't make a difference between either it's biogenic or fossil. But we do acknowledge that sometime there could be reason to reflect only the biogenic emission, for instance. But that could lead to another question. So then how do we consider the CO2 capture from the atmosphere through direct air carbon capture technology? Is it biogenic? Is it fossil? Well, it's not. And then we should also flag the need for consistent accounting for the methane characterization factor, because it's equal to the one of fossil methane in the case of -1+1, but it's lower in the case of the 0-0 approach, and that's because a portion of the oxidized a portion of the methane is oxidized as CO2, and if you say that you don't account the CO2 because it's biogenic, it makes your characterization factor being lower. And I think not everyone is always aware of that, so this is something we will flag as well. So something familiar again. So again, we are asking you to supply us feedback through the poll about the relevance of our approach, scientific soundness, and applicability with the exact same definition as we had before. So now I will stop sharing and I will leave Marisa showing the poll.
Can you see it, Lorie? Do you want me to read the results?
Yeah, because I don't see it yet. I need to.
We have
Also yeah, go ahead.
We have almost 47 answers, and most are improve applicability, so over half of the votes, and 44% say improve scientific soundness, and only a very small percentage say to improve the relevance.
Okay, so we are again on applicability.
Yes.
So we can see that it's an important issue for the community, or that we gave a big focus on that, so that sounds good. Don't know if we should give a bit more time or we go to the next follow-up question.
There's almost 70 answers, so I think we can move on.
Yes. So that's noted, applicability.
Yes.
So same principle as before. To what extent do you find the approach applicable, ranking from 1 to 5? 1 being not applicable, 5 being very applicable. And yes, this is I just saw the comment of Massimo. This was the first part, so it's just about dealing with biogenic carbon. And we felt we had to do a specific presentation about that because this issue seems to be, yeah, really much discussed, let's say, in the community. There's going to be a specific guideline of the GLAM just on that. So, so we thought we had to, or it was a concern we had to address today. And to show how we intend to do it in a line. I cannot see if we have a lot of voters yet.
Almost 60 or 60 now, with an average of 3.4.
3.4, okay, so we stay. We can do better again, but maybe we will reach the 4 today, I don't know.
We will look at the distributions later when we have a real data. Lorie, there is a question about, can you explain the conservative choices that you advise for cradle to gate studies?
Yes, well, very conservative is to assume that everything would be released. I mean, of course, yeah, we will refine it better and make it clear in the, I don't want to say guideline, but framework. But the point here is really to ensure that we don't, and that's really important also in the industry, that the -1 + 1 method that we put forward, because it is more consistent and accounts for all flow, is then used to give a credit to product by stopping at the gate and then say, oh, see, we use biomass, so we are carbon negative.
Do you want to move on to the next question, Lorie?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is very similar to what we've seen before. To what, yeah, that's the one we've just done. Huh? It should be the ranking. Yes. Yes, and how can we improve or ensure the applicability? So here again, it's to rank the different options that we have put here. So provide detailed guidance, like tutorial and guidelines, use a tier approach. So this is something we foresee, but we want a bit of validation, and provide pre-calculated data. And maybe all of it, of course, but we ask you to rank it. And again, as before, you can click on the little arrow and provide some additional comments and suggestions.
So I think most people would provide detailed guidance as the #1 way to improve the applicability. And then they provide pre-calculated data is now in the second place, Lorie.
Okay. Yeah, I cannot see it. And I cannot see how many votes we have either.
Almost 60 again.
Okay.
And for the improvements, there's a lot of people asking for examples and guidelines.
Okay, so we take it.
Yes.
But I can also look a little bit at what is being said in the chat. I can see Massimo is very active in answering. It's really good.
I'm trying to answer as much as possible. There is a question here. I'm not sure how to answer. We're assessing from Ricardo, the environmental footprint method. Are you considering the flow called carbon dioxide to soil or biomass stock, which has a carbon characterization factor of -1? I'm not sure how to answer that. This is about permanent storage of carbon in soil.
I'm not sure, or it just refers to one of the biosphere flow that you find in LCA software. Using the environmental footprint method, are you considering the flow called carbon dioxide to soil? I mean, yes, the point here is also to be aware that you need to be relevant with the LCA method that you're then using. If you say that you want to use a thorough -1 +1 approach, so then you account for your releases, and this -1 factor that is often in the equivalent data included in many of the processes would have to be looked at very carefully. So that is indeed one drawback of the method we're proposing. To make sure it's consistent, and then it is true we will need to comment about that, because that's counted as -1 indeed. In most methods, actually, yeah, this flow. Okay, I think we can move on to the next part. So I try to share my screen again. That's not what you're supposed to see. Let's go back to the presentation. Yes. So do you see the presenter mode or the comment mode?
The wrong one.
The wrong one. Good. And now it's fine. So this second part, we want to focus on the time and space dependent characterization factor. As I said earlier, we have two focus in the line, so climate, and there we specifically promise to deliver time at least dependent on characterization factor on the GTP and GWP metric. And the second focus is biodiversity. So I think we have a very wide audience, and I can see there are many, let's say, LCA practitioners, advanced, but there is also people that are not necessarily doing LCA. So it's just a little wrap up on, okay, what is the GWP metric to understand the next step. So I will try to be as explain the best I can. But basically the GWP metric of a given substance is what it's called absolute global warming of that substance over a certain horizon time, divided by the absolute global warming potential of a reference substance, and CO2 has been chosen by the IPCC as the reference substance. And that's also equal to the integral of the radiative forcing over a time horizon selected over time of your gas of interest by the radiative forcing of CO2 over the same time horizon. So you can see this parameter here, the radiative forcing, can be calculated with these two variables. And I don't want to go too much in the detail because that's what you can find in the IPCC, how it's calculated. But then you can end up to decompose it and end up with a certain formula. So here's the one for CO2, but you have it for all the greenhouse gas, and it decomposes into a certain coefficient that you can find. IPCC provide them, and a summation of this coefficient, and it comes as 4 terms. So first one, second, third, and fourth, with a certain the tau we see, which is the perturbation lifetime, and that is also given by the IPCC. So all of that, so this is what is used, and this will come later into, okay, now how can we modify this so we can address the issues of when exactly my emission is released. So there are let's say, two approach. The conventional approach is that we consider that all emissions take place at the moment of use of the product. There's typically a certain amortization that may be used, for instance, for land use. That's random. The impact on greenhouse gas are assessed over a given fixed time horizon, and there are often inconsistency in the time horizon of greenhouse gas and the time duration of the assessment or the system that is being under study. And then an approach that has been used, so it's often called dynamic LCA, where you have characterization factor for each year of emission. So not always the same, but a different one, reflecting the amount of cumulative radiative forcing that an emission in a given year would lead to until the fixed time horizon. So emissions occurring at the beginning are given more weight. So it's the idea behind it. I will come back to that, but there are also some issues about the GWP metric, and that's something we can wonder or readdress in the line. Do we want GWP 100 only, or push for GWP 20, 500, or some more? So for this approach or dynamic approach that I was mentioning, there are several examples. So here is one taken from a publication. I don't know if you see, but I provided the link below of Schmidt et al. In 2015. And that takes again, so here it's based on the IPCC 2007, so assessment report 4. The one I showed earlier was based on assessment report 5, but it's the same equation I was showing here with this factorization here. Yeah, just developed. And then you can see these different A0, A1, A2, A3 factor, and the same with the perturbation here that is given by the IPCC. And the idea here would be that instead of doing the integration from 0 to the time horizon for the gas of interest, it would be from the delta T, we can say, to the time horizon. So the delta T being, so am I looking at emission at year 1? Am I looking at emission at year 2, at year 3, etc.? And that is quite easy and has been implemented by the author as an Excel file. And you can just, by applying the equation for your given time of interest, compute the year per year global warming potential for the different greenhouse gas. And you have a similar approach that has been developed by Kendall in 2012, just that she has a difference on the integral here. So the assessment time minus the analytical time, sorry, so time horizon minus here the year where you're considering your emission as the two limits of the integral, but it's basically the same principle. And then there is also Annie Levasseur, for those that know her, that developed some dynamic characterization factor in 2010 and 2012. As I was saying earlier, it remains that this is still GWP, and there are some criticism on this method from climatologists, among other. I may not go through all of them, but this principle of the impulse emission is not the real emission profile. The time horizon, well, is by no way really scientifically justified. There's an underestimation of short-term effect of short-lived GHG, etc. So this, for this reason, there is another metric, and then we can also use some others, but the GTP. And this is one that we said we would look at in the Align project. So here the idea is more to reflect the actual effect on the temperature change, not just change in radiative forcing. And there is also, well, an equation, as we saw before, that is well defined by the IPCC that we can use, and that we can use dynamically just as it has been done for the GWP. But again, there are some other methods. I mean, there is the CGTP, for example. There is the GWP star. There is this idea developed by my colleague to just address the global mean temperature change. So there are different options here. And although we did not promise to deliver on that, we also want to show the difference it can make to use this other method. But we will supply a set of dynamic characterization factor for GWP and GTP as we promised to deliver. Now for biodiversity, it's a bit more complex because unlike climate, the proposed indicators are not midpoint but endpoint. There are 5 acknowledged drivers of biodiversity. So climate itself, what is called pollution, land use change, overexploitation of biotic resources, and introduction of invasive alien species. So these are those recognized in the Millennium Assessment Report. And typically there is a characterization factor for, well, each or rather some of these drivers, most of the time not all. And it's still to be clarified if these are to be used separately or aggregated into one single characterization factor. So it's really evolving, let's say, the field of addressing biodiversity in LCA. Many methods have been proposed. There's no international consensus, but fortunately, there are many reviews available. So one very recent one is made by authors from the GRC, and they looked at 64 different methods, but 23 were critically compared. Some are said to be life cycle impact assessment based. Some are said to be beyond LCA. There are 2 types of indicator that we can see emerging. Let's say one is the so-called PDF, potentially disappeared fraction of species. And one is the MSA, so that's more for the beyond LCA approach, mean species abundance reduction. So again, here that's from this review from Damani et al. And then you can see all these different methods that they critically compare, how they address the different drivers that I was telling earlier. Which ecosystem they consider. So typically most of them they consider the terrestrial quite well, but the marine and freshwater much less. Which taxonomic groups are concerned. And then they also distinguish in essential biodiversity variable class and some fundamental aspects of biodiversity. And yeah, one method seem to be doing a little better than the other, addressing more of these parameters. But this being said, we still can think, okay, well, what are the characterization factors for the different substances related to this? So yes, what to use in a line. So that is to be further investigated. And again, there are recommendations, but they are not, yeah, I will come back to that, but they are not time dependent. So, and not space dependent either, but there are some examples, and there's one here very recent that has not been reviewed by Damiani, where you have this ambition to make time and space dependent characterization factor for biodiversity. There is 20 GHG considered. There are 3 background climate conditions based on different representative concentration pathways. And then with near surface temperature data from 5 models. And then the overlaid map of this temperature projection, so at the spatial scale, with maps on the species temperature limit. That is so that is when you can define the fraction of species was realized their near surface temperature niche limit, and there are some maps about that to see how the temperature rise affect the realize how to say the abundance of species. And by overlaying these 2, you can let's say develop characterization factor through this equation here. may look complicated, but actually it is not that complex. It is just a cumbersome spatial work. And yes, so the author end up with these spatial and time-dependent characterization factor for 20 GHG, also available per species group and per geography. But that again is only climate. We saw that there's 5 drivers of the biodiversity. So then what we do with the others. But this is to show what's emerging. And here, as I said, we don't want to develop a methodology, but more to work on recommendation. So, so preliminary recommendation here are that, well, there are some that already exist, as I was saying. There is the GLAM, especially in volume 1, there is something about a specific about global warming and also specific biodiversity method that is recommended, although there's been quite some work since. So we will, these are not time and space dependent, but we will nevertheless contrast what we recommend to that. We will provide a tier recommendation with dynamic characterization factor for climate and perhaps also going beyond, as I was saying earlier. And we will provide a tier recommendation for time and space dependent characterization factor for biodiversity based on our assessment of the literature. So the poll once again, and we will once again ask about relevance, scientific soundness and applicability. So I will leave it to Marisa to start the poll and try to go back. So yeah, the question again, how do you think we can improve the approach for dynamic characterization factor of climate impact proposed in the line, knowing that it's still preliminary at this stage? But yeah, we did show what the project asked us to do and in which direction, let's say, we started to look at. So yeah, the question again, how do you think we can improve the approach for dynamic characterization factor of climate impact proposed in the line, knowing that it's still preliminary at this stage? But yeah, we did show what the project asked us to do and in which direction, let's say, we started to look at. And there might be something we forgot or some ideas or comments, yeah, you have. These are very welcome and usable because, yeah, most of the work is in front of us on this part.
So for the results, again,
No
we
surprise.
have the improve applicability as the main or the most commonly answered option, with almost 60% of the people giving this answer.
We put so much effort on making answers scientific soundness and relevance, and everybody chooses applicability. But I'm kidding. As actually, it's very good to see, and yeah, clear direction. But there is more questions, right?
Yes, I think this one we can close. It seems again pretty clear.
Okay, and then I will move on to the next one.
Yes. So to what extent do you find the approach applicable? From 1 to 5. 5 being very applicable and 1 not that applicable.
I might add the reason why we asked this question many times is that we can make a comparison between the different parts of the project and see where, because we have to improve applicability in many places, but now we also can see which of those are where we really should make more effort.
Yes.
Thank you,
So
Magnus.
we have a relatively low score, Lorie. So 2.9 right now.
Oh, so the ambition for the 4 is not just an ambition still. Yes. Well, of course, I can understand because I did not propose a very clear approach yet, just the directions, let's say. But it would be difficult to answer. So yeah. It would be good to understand a bit better why it's not that applicable.
Maybe we can get it in the next question.
Yes.
Okay. This is also the last poll, by the way.
I mean, this dynamic characterization factor, perhaps because I tried to show the how it's built, but it end up in the next. I mean, if we just look at applicability, let's say, and we don't want to know too much about the scientific relevance behind, yes, it is quite not that if I would think quite applicable, but it's good to see that it was not well conveyed. So other improvement.
Okay, last poll is still a ranking of options, and then you can add your comment also in the second. If you click on the little window on the bottom right, then you can add your comment.
I don't see it.
So for now, the most important options are to provide the calculation tools, to provide pre-calculated data, and to provide automated LCA methods. And for the other improvements, some of the participants have asked for guidelines, cost value, and case studies.
Yes, case study. We have that. Yes. I think it was mentioned by Patrick at the beginning, but we have 5 specific sector, and then we applied all these methods within this case study. We test it, and then of course we will try to fine tune or LCA afterwards and or methods. So yes, case study we will have. Try to look at the discussion. You can see, Massimo, also you answered a lot of questions. Yes, and then there's a coherence with the Schmidt approach and the LCIs.
There is a question here about cradle to gate assessment.
The one from Lucy, is that? I'm starting from the end to the in this approach to badging carbon, where they simply look at how much carbon is in the bio-based product and calculate the negative carbon from that.
I mean, the issue is that if you have a cradle to gate study and then you account for uptake of carbon and not for release afterwards, like let's say you produce a bioplastic and you have a lot of carbon uptake, then you stop your study at gate and then you don't account for that bioplastic for packaging is going to be burned in 2 weeks after it's produced, and this carbon is released, and then you market or you claim this product is carbon negative. This is plain greenwashing. So we need to avoid that at all costs. This is not good for the industry, not good for LCA. So there are 2 ways. Either you adjust the characterization factors to avoid that. That's also what we are trying to do in the project, to try to provide a guideline for these cases. What will be the most sensible approach there, based on our votes, because we also cannot accept misleading messages. And we see already some examples. So this is happening. This is a very relevant. It's not a hypothetical situation I'm describing. How are we with the survey?
We have 51 responses, and I think still the same options are ranked first as before. And there are a lot of other improvements suggested.
Okay.
Yeah, for now in the word cloud, I can only see a couple of words, but afterwards, after this workshop, we receive all of the data and we will receive your full responses, and we will take this into account.
Yes, and I can see, I mean, okay, now we don't, we chose the method of the poll, so we cannot answer all the questions in the chat, but there are, I can see many interesting comments that we can take into account as well.
There is one on biodiversity here. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Me neither. The one from Iris on how we consider linkage with the PEF. And that is also, yeah, how, I mean, I think again, we need to comment on what exists, and the PEF is something that we cannot not comment. If there is differences between what we are putting forward and what is within the PEF, but I cannot say more than that for now, since we are only at the stage of still looking at what exists. But I can say that there's been a lot of additional work since the PEF on biodiversity characterization factor. Yes. I mean, the presentation quite fast. I can see a question when the resources mentioned today will be available. But then all the other resources and calculation tool, I mean, we have some deliverable, but I don't know if it will be published online at the same time.
We have a deliverable in 6 months where there would be the current version of the methodologies will be made available. So you will be able to access a lot of the things we presented today in 6 months. Are we done with the surveys?
I believe
Yes,
so.
yeah, that was the last one.
Okay, fantastic. Then I think we have about 10 minutes, and maybe it's time for some concluding remarks, which I don't remember from the schedule. Is it Patrick doing it, or is it me?
Patrick is doing the wrap up, but we have a couple of minutes if you want to do the.
I will just say to thank everybody for attending. There will be a wrap up from Patrick, just personally saying thank you for your questions, and we will take all into account. And sorry if we didn't answer all of them, but yeah, doing our best here. Thank you, Patrick. You go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Lorie. Thank you for this interesting presentation. And I would also like to thank all of the participants. We didn't have any results yet, but we try to present our methods and gather your feedback. There's lots of interest in that, and that's wonderful. That's very good to see. So we appreciate that very much. All in all, everything was a kind of a little bit messy, and you get that when you try to gather impact when you have these polls. We don't mind. We hope that you didn't mind either. What we saw from the content was that there was a lot of emphasis on the applicability of the methods that we are working on. Use of pre-calculated data would be very much appreciated. Examples were very much would be appreciated. Tutorials, tools, guidelines, that's also all quite important. We take that in. That's the big overall message. And also, you have also included specific comments at some points as how we can improve this applicability. We will take all those comments into account. We thank you for that. We will look at it. And yeah, the last thing I would like to say is you are warmly welcome, warmly invited for our next workshop, which will be held in around 6 months. And then we will hopefully have some results, some progress, and we hope to get your feedback again. So thank you very much for this. And yeah, this is the end then, I think, of the workshop. So thank you.